So my name is Sarah Squire. I am the founder and principal consultant of a company I started about 2 years ago called Engage Identity. It's called Engage Identity because I have an unhealthy obsession with Captain Picard. The best captain. And we're going to talk a little bit about Agile project management. So why do we do Agile? So traditionally we've done projects in a waterfall fashion where we plan everything out ahead of time. We decide what we're going to do, we build it out in stages, and then we execute piece by piece, everything, all of the dependencies in order. Agile's a little bit different. We do things in what we call sprints and epics. So the idea behind sprints is that it's an amount of work that you can do in a short period of time. So it's the amount of work that we do in between meetings. So we'll meet, we'll come together, we'll plan a sprint, we'll sprint, usually a week or 2 weeks, and then we'll meet again for a retrospective. During those sprints, we do something called stand-ups, which is a meeting that we have usually every day in the morning, and each person goes around. We specifically talk about 3 things, and only 3 things, which is, what did you do yesterday? What are you gonna do today? And what are your blockers? And when we say blockers, we mean things that are keeping you from getting things done. So the roles in an Agile environment, first we have the stakeholder. So the stakeholder is a very high-level person. They're not involved in the day-to-day operation of the project. They're someone who is invested in the outcome of the project. So they want to be informed about what's going on. They want to know about timelines. They want to know how fast this can happen and how well it's going, but they don't necessarily know the day-to-day. The next level down would be the product owner. So this might be the identity team themselves if you're building out an identity product, but often identity teams do work for other teams. So you might be working, if you're at a university, you might be working for alumni donations on helping them make their login system or their payment system better and more usable, more secure. Or you might be working for a dentist office and helping them figure out good identity for all of their employees. Those would be your product owners. Then you have the project manager. So this is the person who is really establishing and enforcing the process that the team is using to get things done and making sure that things are getting done in the established order that we intended. And then you have the team members. And the team members' job is to just do the things that are assigned to them. And often we like to assign things that are maybe outside of that person's area of expertise so that they can get cross-trained, or things that they might be uncomfortable doing so that they can get more comfortable. So one of the first things that we like to do when we start a project is to create something called personas. And a persona is a fake person, but they have a picture and they have a name. And we try to establish personas about people that we might not think about in the day-to-day life of the project. So people who are colorblind. So we might have a persona called Mike. Mike is colorblind, and we know that if we make this a red-green toggle button, that Mike isn't going to be able to see that. And when we have a name for this person, we have a face for this person, it's much easier for the team to relate to them. So we have people who have limited sight, people who are older, people who use screen readers, people who use zoomed text on their screen to make sure that all of those people are people we care about, people we're building for. We want them to be at the top of mind when we're doing a project. So the next thing we do is we create epics. And epics are user stories, but they're very large. They're things that can't be broken down into small, actionable tasks. This might be something like, as an administrator of the dentist office, I want to be able to see all of my logins and all of my activity in my organization. I want a dashboard. That's not something that we can send to a developer and say, okay, go build that. That would be an epic. So we take that epic and we break it down into smaller user stories. So user stories need to have 6 aspects, which we will get into later. This is the basic form of a user story. So you want to start with the role that the user is. So as an administrator or as an end user, I want to be able to do some feature, and then we talk about the reason that they want to do it so that I know what's going on in my organization. And the 6 ways that a user story has to be crafted, fortunately, fall into the acronym INVEST. So first they have to be independent. If the user story is dependent on something else, it indicates that it's probably a bigger thing than you're thinking about, that those user stories should probably be combined. Each independent user story should not have any dependencies above it that are required for it to get done. It should be negotiable. So when we talk as a team about what we're going to get done, we should be able to figure out whether this user story needs to be bigger or smaller, if this particular feature needs to change in some way. The user story should be valuable. So it should provide value to whatever user is identified in the user story. So as a role, whatever that role is, it should create value for that role. It should be estimatable. And we'll talk more about estimation and how we do that a little bit later. But it should be something that is a concrete task. So you should be able to tell about how much work it is. If it's something that you've never done before, something that you don't even know is possible, that wouldn't make a good user story. It should be small. So it should be the smallest breakdown of work that you can possibly create that still falls within these parameters. And it should be testable. So you need to know when it's done. So something like we want administrators to be happy with the system isn't testable, right? We can't say, okay, we have criteria, we know that these criteria have been met and it's done. So these are the cards that we use for project management, user stories. I have a deck of these here that I will hand out to whoever is the first person to ask a question. So the idea with these is that they're physical cards, we write on them with pens, and it forces us to keep the correct parameters. So these are sold by Brain Trust, you can find them on Amazon. So these help you craft the right parameters for the user story, and then you can check off and make sure that it meets each of the 6 criteria. And then the back looks like this, where we can talk about what does it mean for this to be done. So what are the criteria where we say, okay, the team agrees this user story is complete. So you'll notice on the front of that card, there was a part for size and a part for business value. And those are things that we as a team have to agree on. And they're really, really hard to agree on because generally, if you're in a team and you're having a team meeting and you say, how big do you think this user story is? And someone might say, well, I think I could get it done in an hour. And that kind of level sets for everyone else in the group. Well, okay, maybe 2 hours, maybe half an hour, but no one's gonna come out and say, well, I think it's actually 5 hours. So when we talk about estimation, we don't actually talk about hours. We talk about story points. And this helps us to figure out how big things are relative to each other, so that we don't have to exactly map out how many hours things are gonna take. We just wanna know roughly how big they are. This thing is about twice as big as this other thing. And in order to stop that level setting or inflation that happens with estimation when you're in a team meeting, we use something called planning poker. So we have these cards. I have a deck of these as well to hand out to you guys. So each person on the team gets a different color. They get a stack of cards. And does anybody know what the sequence is? 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. Fibonacci, well done. Yes, so we use the Fibonacci sequence because it's just a good way to get at about how big something is, right? We don't need these gradations between 3 and 5 and 5 and 8. We just want to know, is this about twice as big as this other thing? Is this about 3 times as big? And this helps us figure out how many story points we can get done in one sprint. And the idea behind the poker cards is that each person privately makes a decision about how many story points they think this user story is. They put their card face down, and then everyone turns over their cards at the same time so that you're not level setting each other, so that you can make an independent decision and assumptions about the project. And this can tell you a lot about how well you crafted your user stories, because if someone thinks it's a 40 and someone else thinks it's a 2, they're thinking about that feature in very different ways, or they have different information. Someone knows that this is a toggle button that we can just switch and it can be done in an afternoon, and someone else thinks that it's a feature that we have to build out that's gonna take us weeks. So those are good things to be able to ferret out very quickly, and planning poker will help you do that. So as you do planning poker and as you do more and more projects, you will get an idea of your team's velocity. So velocity is what we talk about when we talk about how many story points we can get done in one sprint. And It's going to be wrong at first. Your first sprint, you're going to say, oh, I think we can get 50 story points done, and you will either get 20 or you will get 100. But over time, you will figure out what your team velocity is. You will figure out what each person can get done in terms of story points. And if you're lucky enough to have a consistent team over time, you can get very, very accurate about how much you can get done within a certain period. So what do we do? You'll notice that these cards, there's one with a question mark, which indicates maybe this wasn't a good user story, maybe it wasn't estimatable. What do we do with things that aren't estimatable? How do we figure out, we don't want to never take something on that we don't know how to do or that we don't know how long it will take. What do we do when we want to take something on that's never been built before, we don't know how long it will take, we don't know what to do about it? We use a practice called time boxing. So the idea behind time boxing is we're going to spend 2 days on this, or we're going to spend a week on this, and we're just going to bang out this feature and we're going to see what we get done in that week. Maybe it'll be great, maybe it'll only be good, maybe it'll be terrible and we realize that we should not go any further on this. But it'll give us some idea so that we can estimate in the future and get better at those user stories of how hard is this to actually make without allowing us to go off on a tangent and try and make something perfect when we don't know how long it'll take. So after we finish a sprint, we do retrospectives. And retrospectives are a really important part of the Agile project management process. During a retrospective, you can really get the team to talk about how that sprint went, where they think the feature sets are going, what sorts of things they want to bring into the project, what sorts of things they want to cut, how communication is going, what we should be saying to other teams, what dependencies we have on other teams, whether other teams are giving us what we need to get our work done. All those things come up in retrospectives, and that allows you, when you start sprint planning again, to get better at it every time, every sprint, so that you can be more effective. So that's all I have prepared. I wanted to save a lot of time for user questions because I know you guys have a lot of questions, and Agile project management is something that is sort of adjacent to identity and that a lot of us have experienced but might have specific questions about. So have at it with the questions, and I do have handouts for the first people to ask questions. Yes?
So how do you handle when you have a user story that you thought you could get done in the time frame, but it goes over? So like you thought you could get it done in a week, but you run into complications, and you have to carry it over. Do you just carry it over, or do you?
Good question. So what happens when a user story spreads over the length of the sprint that you have? Ideally, you want to be able to get a user story done within the sprint. Sometimes it just carries over, and sometimes you just get it done in the following sprint. Sometimes you have to rework it because you didn't estimate it correctly or you didn't estimate your team's availability correctly. And so you have to look at the user story and say, did we craft this in the wrong way? Was this a feature that's actually 2 features, and that's why it's taking so long? Is it a feature that has some dependency that we don't have, that we haven't thought about? And so breaking that out, making sure that we have the correct user stories. Otherwise, yeah, sometimes they just bleed over, and it's not ideal, but it happens. Do you want user story cards or planning poker?
I'll take the user story.
All right. Hey. All right. Yes.
You didn't speak about teams or structure, so can you talk about what capabilities that a typical team would be, and when you have projects that might have capabilities or other products that are outside of those lanes?
I swear to God, this guy is not a ringer. I will be in this room at 2:30 talking about the anatomy of an identity team and what identity teams should look like and what kind of roles and skill sets you need. Do you want planning poker cards? There you go. All right. Yes.
Similar sort of question. I've done a lot of deployments in big organizations, whatever, and they always think they're doing Agile, but they're not. So
Just because it's called a sprint doesn't mean you're doing Agile. Yeah.
But when you're dealing with, let's say, a core team of guys that are doing the identity part, but you're also interfacing with other people from other departments that are coming into the project, how do you manage that? Because it throws the project off completely every time I try to plan.
Okay, so the question is, how do you manage interfacing with teams that think they're Agile but aren't?
Yeah.
Oh boy. I mean, it's a good question. I think you have to isolate your own team and say, this is what we're going to get done and how we're going to work. This is our process.
One of the problems that I always have is that it's not just one team. Very often when you come to these organizations, there could be actual multiple consultancies who are working together. And
Absolutely.
It's chaos sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to implement this.
Yeah, getting input from other teams is definitely something that is always a challenge in Agile. But I think it's actually easier in Agile than it is in Waterfall because you can change the process midstream and say, okay, this team is now 6 months behind. We're going to have to change our process and start building out something else because while we're waiting for them. Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, I know you said you'll go through the team dynamic later this afternoon.
Yeah.
I was just wondering for roles, you put team and then you put project manager. So typically an Agile team has also a Scrum Master. Is that in the team or you're using the project manager to replace the Scrum Master?
Yeah, I would say I kind of use Scrum Master and Project Manager or Project Manager interchangeably. Not everyone uses Scrum. I would love to do something on Kanban, which I think is a really fun form of Agile for projects that are ongoing or teams that are ongoing, especially an identity team. I know an identity team at University of Washington in Seattle, where I live, that uses Kanban, and they just have each feature set they're working on, each bug they're working on, they go through their Kanban board. So there are all sorts of different kinds of Agile, and Scrum is one of them. But yeah, Scrum Master and Project Manager, I think I just use kind of interchangeably.
Yeah.
The person who manages the process, yeah. Yes?
For a team who has not done this before, what would you advise? So your identity team has been composed of system administrators and developers, and they don't talk the same language often. So you're trying to bring in an agile project management methodology in the team, where most of the team will be writing their own tasks. They've never done a task before. They don't understand user stories and stuff. So what would be your 2 cents on a team who is just starting adapting this?
So the question is, how, if you're a new team or you're a team that hasn't used Agile before, how do you start adopting it? I think it's really hard to teach yourself Agile. You certainly can, but it would probably be easier to bring in an experienced project manager, either on a contract basis or pull someone from somewhere else in the organization who can kind of help you through the first few sprints or the first few projects to help you understand the pace and the processes involved. That's what I would do. Yes?
In my group, I am the developer, I'm the tester, and everything. How do I implement Agile for one person?
That's a great, okay, so the question is, if I am a team of one, I am the project manager and the stakeholder and the team member, how do I implement Agile just for myself? You can still do user stories just for yourself. You can still write things down on cards and decide how long you're gonna take to do it, and then take some time to reflect all on your own and say, how do I feel about my velocity? How do I feel about my user stories? What do I want to work on next? And assign yourself those chunks of work. Agile absolutely works for one-person teams. It feels kind of silly, but yeah, it works. Right.
Is there a deadline in the Agile project?
Is there a deadline in an Agile project? There is an estimated time that we think the project is going to get done, and that estimated time gets more and more accurate as you do the project, right? Because your team velocity gets more accurate. You figure out how much work you can get done, and the number of user stories you have obviously goes down as you complete them. And so you have an estimate of when you're going to get done, but you don't really have hard deadlines, right?
And the second question, where does the documentation fit in the Agile project?
The question is, where does documentation fit in an Agile project? I have documentation as a user story in my Agile project, so I will say, as a developer coming in the future, I want to read about how the software was built so that I can improve it, right? So that is a story in and of itself, and someone has to go and get that done. Yeah. I'll take one more question, and then that's all the time we have, because these are really short sessions. Yes, in the back.
So there was a great introduction to the Agile methodology that can be applied to almost any software development project. I was wondering, is there any specific characteristics for the identity projects that needs to be to tailor this methodology? And also in the same direction, today morning the ID flow was introduced, and I was one of the questions of the architect who covers also the body flow. And I was wondering, do you
So two great questions there. One is, can this general Agile methodology be adapted for identity? And the second question is, are we going to include project management in the body of knowledge for ID Pro? So to answer your first question, I think that this works really well as is on identity teams. I've used it on identity teams repeatedly, and it's great. I think that it's more that when you're doing project management for an identity team, using Agile is really important because you are a layer that everyone depends on in your organization. And if you are not adaptable and able to change very quickly to other people's changing endpoints, changing resources, changing technologies, if you are not able to change the way that you're working, you're going to be not very effective in your organization. So it's more that Agile helps us rather than identity specifically changing the way that we would do Agile itself. And to the second question, the ID Pro body of knowledge isn't written yet. We're all going to write it together. So if people want to put things about project management in there, I think we definitely could. Obviously, there is a project management body of knowledge already. So we could also talk to them about project management for identity and getting into their body of knowledge. So I think that's an interesting question that we should explore. But there's no set table of contents for the body of knowledge yet. And so we all need to build that together, and we'll find out. So thank you all.